In third grade, they invited the parents, and everybody had to tell a story. I was in third grade. So I talked about this book, how I liked this story about this frog in the pond. And I told the whole story. The only trouble is, instead of the word frog, I used pada. And Odell Bratland to this day teases me about that I would mix Norwegian words with the English words. And everybody laughed, but I never knew why.
I had a kindergarten teacher, and all I remember was what I really liked was a big sandbox in the back of the room. And it was just at our level. It was a metal liner in this table. And we had a lot of sand, and we could go back there and play.
And you actually had, did have kindergarten, or was it first grade?
We had kindergarten.
Wow.
Yeah, I missed kindergarten.
Yeah, and you probably didn't have kindergarten either then with a country school, right? You know.
No.
That's why I can't share. I
Oh, which country school did you go to?
I went to District 77. That was out in Wilmington. It's by the. It's called the Morgan School, but it was right next to the Oldreds.
Oh, okay.
And what was very unusual, and which I always am thankful, we had 8 months of school rather than 9.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the 8 months, we had a picnic. And I remember how we saved up money so we could have, and they brought down Spring Grove Pop and hot dogs.
Uh-huh.
And boy, was that a treat too. And so we saved up our money. And if we could get a quarter, then we could get 2 hot dogs, 2 bottles of pop, and then some other little treats.
Did you ever
But then we went to something that we really waited for, and that was we had 1 month of solid religious training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was really a thrill.
And so was that at the school then, or did you go to the church?
The school.
At the school.
Every country school had that. Around Spring Grove, and of course Spring Grove was unusual in that it had 1 Norwegian Lutheran church, and every church surrounding Spring Grove was Norwegian Lutheran. And to my knowledge, every school in the country had that. And then in Spring Grove, when we went to high school, we had release time to go to religious training there.
Mm-hmm. When you did the 1 month, was that also in Norwegian then, or were you?
No, everything was
Everything.
in English.
Okay.
There's a lot of us, spoke Norwegian, so we had a little difficulty speaking English when we first started school.
Sure.
No, but I loved our third grade teacher, Miss Larson, and she had a lorgnette. That's glasses with a little chain. She was a beautiful woman, and you'd do anything for her, And one day she went out, our room was right across from the superintendent's office, and she came in and she said, I broke my glasses. And we all were crushed. And the next week or so she came with ordinary glasses, and that was pretty sure. That's what I remember. But she was such a wonderful teacher.
Sure.
And good looking. So your teachers do have a big effect on you.
Yes.
And I went into 4th grade, and Norma Ellingson and I went into one room. They split the 4th grade into 2 rooms, and we wanted a certain teacher, so we went into that room. They said, no, you don't go in there. You and Norma go into this room.
They didn't let you choose.
No, they didn't let us.
So how was the school set up? Was it all elementary on the one level, or how
Yes,
did they?
yes, all on one level there.
So like when
That's
you
how-
go up the steps and it'd be on that level? And
All the elementary was on one level.
Okay.
No, and then 5th and 6th grade were up the first stairs.
So when you came in the school, there was, where was the elementary? You'd go up the flight or down the flight? Upstairs?
Up.
And then on that first floor there.
Yeah, the band room was down below the 1st grade room, which is right on the
So that was on this side, the south side?
closest to the road, the
Okay.
highway.
Okay.
That's how.
Because it's hard to figure out how they did 12 grades with the space that was there.
Well, it was when I was there, it was the 1st and 2nd grade in the same room. Because, like Buxengard was in there, and that Vile Buxengard, and he never was in our class otherwise. So it was first and second
maybe
grade.
it was first and second in that.
Yeah, in the first room was first and second.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I remember Opal
Larson.
Stopey. She ate paste.
Yes. And she had black hair with bangs and short, and she looked like what was that comic strip, the Prince?
Oh, Prince Valiant.
Prince Valiant.
Prince Valiant.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I thought she looked like that. That was so cute. I thought that was cute.
You know, our country school was really simple. We had one room with 8 grades.
Yeah.
And my first grade teacher was Mariah Chomey. Then later she married Angus Eckern, so her name became. And she was the most wonderful lady. We had always had 20-some in our class. And in first grade, of course, we sat in the front row. And then as you got older, you sat behind.
20 students in the room or 20 in your class?
There were 3 in our class.
Yeah, 3. That's what I was thinking. 20 students altogether.
Yeah, well, I think there was 22,
Was it varied each
21,
every year?
varied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the end of the school year, Mariah gave me a knife because I'd gone to school every day.
Wow.
And of course, we had 2 miles to walk.
Sure.
Just think.
And sometimes the others didn't go, our neighbors or my brother and sister, but I went to school. And so she said, you have to be rewarded. And I'll never forget it. I got this nice pearl knife.
Wow.
And I went home, and we had an apple orchard. And I was down under this tree, and all of a sudden, I didn't have the knife. And years and years, I looked for that knife. So one time, I saw Mariah, and I thanked her so much for that knife, and I told her the story. So about 6 months later, we were down in the church basement after the service, and Mariah said, say, would you come down to the house? I have something for you. And I said, well, what is it? I said, I can't make it. Well, she said, I have something. Well, I said, do you have it here? And she says, yeah, but looked around the room. And then she opened up her purse and unrolled, and it was in toilet paper. There was a knife just like she'd given me. And she said after she heard the story, she found this used knife and bought it.
Oh.
And I still have it.
In an antique store, I think.
And then at each homecoming, we had the District 77 reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got pictures of all the different people. And going back, well, my mother's picture was 1906 or 7. And we put together a booklet. And we had a reunion, and Mariah was so sick. So we brought a booklet up, and Mariah cried and thanked him. It was such a wonderful thing. But that's what I remember, what a wonderful teacher she was.
Sure.
And how much I appreciated.
My favorite teacher was Jewel Nelson DeVerkston.
Yeah.
And she was so good that she said one time, she said, oh, I forgot to bring something to school. She said, I am so sorry. And she apologized to the class, and she said, you know, I'm paid to remember. And another thing she said, I want to teach you about Norway and Sweden, all the Scandinavian countries. And she brought us through a great appreciation for Norway and everything. And at the end she said, we want your mothers to come and we'll serve like krumkaka, lefse, and all of the things. But she incorporated it into all the subjects that we had in school.
Oh, wow.
And it was like having almost one class, but she incorporated all of that learning and appreciation for Norwegians and the background that we came from. So I think that is a good way for elementary children but it could be done because we were all Norwegian practically. Well, it couldn't be done today, but it was fun for us because
Sure.
we got to.
Lee talked about having 3 people in his grade. What would say the average of?
We had between, I would say, 25 and 30, and I
Okay.
think our graduation class was 31 or something like that.
So talk a little bit. What was it like when the country kids, went through one-room schoolhouse and then maybe came to town? Not everybody did,
That's
but
interesting how you stayed over.
Well,
there.
I went, normally you'd go 8 grades,
Mhm.
but our school then would pay if you went to high school. So when I entered 7th grade, Dale Doley and our neighbor Odell Bratland, we were in the same class, so we went to town school. And my neighbor Mervyn Elliston and I stayed at Stella Morgan's house, and they had a large room with 2 beds in it. And Mervyn and I slept in one, and his cousins Elf and Owen Myrie slept in the other bed.
Oh.
And it was just great. We'd make our own breakfast downstairs, and then we had a nice hot meal at the school.
Mhm.
And then because, my dad died when I was 6 months old, so I didn't have any money. So I set pins each night, and it started at 2 cents a line and then a little more. So it was really wonderful. So if I wanted to buy something, I had to work, and it was great. I enjoyed it and had a great life. And Mervyn was a lifelong friend.
Mhm.
We owned a car together. I taught him how to trap. One time he said, "I got a skunk." I said, "Did you clean it?" He says, "No." Well, I said, "Is it cleaned?" He said, "Yeah." "Well, who cleaned it?" He says, "Dad." But we owned the car together, and he married my second cousin, who was Louise's. She and Louise were salutatorians in school,
Oh.
so we were very
Remember
close
Ellingson?
then. And
What did you call your car? It was a name.
well, the old car I called Henry. That was the movie
No,
The
the
Fist.
Hornet.
Oh, the Hornet.
The Green Hornet. It was green and yellow. And Thor Herseth married Lee,
Helen Lee.
Helen Lee, and Thor would sit in C&Ds and tell all these fellows about how his dad had so many cabins on this Lake Cabotogama, and they thought he was just full of it, and so they didn't believe him. And he and Charlie Muller and
Well, Mervyn had a brand new car. I just
he went
came
up
back.
to Cabotogama when they were in high school to see where Thor was.
Well, I just came back out of the Marine Corps just as after the war, and Mervyn had a new car, and so we went up to Thor's. We couldn't believe it, 32 cabins.
Oh my.
And then he took a surfboard. He had a 33-horse Evinrude,
Oh.
and of course there were no shifts, so he had to stand up, and he put a rope around, pulled it, and that thing would whoop, and he'd hang on and sit down, and so we had a great time.
He wasn't telling.
He wasn't telling stories.
No.
Wow.
The fellas went all the way up to Cabotogama on the Canadian border, practically, just to see what Thor was talking about.
Tell a little bit about setting pins at the bowling alley. How many lanes were there?
There were 2 lanes, and it was Oscar Ellingson that owned it, and he was very, very nice to me. He knew that, I needed money, so anytime I could set, and he did have a rack,
Mm-hmm.
so we'd sit on the back, and when the ball would come down, we'd kick our legs up so the pin wouldn't hit you in the face. And then, of course, we'd return the ball and then put up the pins in the rack. And then, these ladies would play, and the ball would come down. Thump. 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 And it would finally get there and barely knock
That
the
was
pins
Palma
down.
Anderson and Minnie Ellingson, and then they go, "Oh!" They were cute. I was there when they were doing that. That was cute. Fun.
we've
the
heard
bowling.
stories of pin setters when the little kids would get up to try to bowl,
Oh.
and they would knock over a few extra pins or so for when it goes down. Is that a true story, or is that just
No,
Not
no,
in your
really,
experience.
seriously.
okay?
I don't remember because I always I set at night,
Oh, okay,
and then they'd have leaks,
sure.
Yeah.
and the one that threw the hardest ball was Dr. LeBold. Wow, I'll tell you, when he threw that ball, but a lot of times it would only knock a few pins down, so it was okay. But we knew how they threw it, and we could tell the curve.
Uh-huh.
And then I should say, when I went into the Marine Corps, I found out that they paid 17 cents a line. So it only cost 20 to go to bowl, but nobody would set pins. And there they didn't have a rack. There what you did, they'd throw the ball down, and then you'd press a lever, and the pin would come out. Pin would come up, and then you'd set the bowling, the pin
Mhm.
over that.
Ah.
But there were a group of us. We made very good money. So every night that I could, I'd set pins. And this was at the El Toro Marine Base in Santa Ana.
Oh.
So,
Oh. Almost made a career of it.
yeah. Well, you'd asked the question about the difference between the country
Mhm.
and the city. Well, there really was a great difference.
Yeah.
Because in our class, we had Ione Gudbranson and Genevieve Qualley, and there were a group that were country kids. And then there were a group of city kids. And I remember I sat next to Ivan Sandiger, and he would tell me, what to do and what not to do. And our teacher was Myra.
Oh.
And I really liked her because she was a tough teacher.
Yeah.
And she knew I was goofing off. I thought she knew. But then I thought she wasn't. So I got my report card, and I had a red F in English.
Ooh.
And she says, "Leland, I want to talk to you." So she said, you should have gotten a C, but I gave you an F because you weren't trying. And she says, in life you've got to try. And you can do better than a C. And I felt like telling her I don't like English, but I figured I better be quiet. But I did work harder, and the next time I got the report card, she had taken the F off and put a C.
Oh.
So she knew I was goofing off, and then because I remember my mother when I started country school, she says, "Leland, now remember this: if I hear anything from the teacher about you, remember this: I'm going to believe the teacher, but I won't believe you." And then I knew there was no need talking about the teacher.
It's a lost cause.
Yeah.
I got to tell you one thing about Mariah. Was right outside teaching in the General Assembly, and my sister Betty and Sylvia Baller decided that the cloakroom outside was so messy and everything, they were going to clean it up at noon hour. So they took all the kids' boots and threw them out in the hall and swept out. But then they couldn't put the boots and stuff that went together. So after school, everybody's in the cloakroom looking, where'd my boots go? I'd never heard that before. Except my Betty said that she and Sylvia thought that it needed a cleaning. Oh, that was
Well,
good.
when you're talking about school, Odell Bratlin had a car. And he was in my school, and Mervyn Elliston was a year older, and I forget who the fourth one was, but it was Halloween. And what I always respected about both of them is that they didn't destroy anything or hurt anything, but Tria's had an old airplane that there was something wrong with it. So we decided, well, why not take that up to the school? So Odell Bratland drove the car. I laid over the top of it, and that old Chevrolet had a cloth top. And Mervyn was on the bumper on one side, and somebody else, I forget who it was on the other side. And we towed it backwards through the, you know, and of course it took up the whole route. And we brought it to the first grade entrance, and we put the nose here and the tail above the door. And if you go look at the school, there's a nice place to put the tail. And then the wings came out, and then we moved a Biffy outside the auditorium and wrote in chalk tickets. But we didn't hurt anything, and nobody said anything to us. But the next morning, you know, we watched, and everybody had to walk around the wings to get into the school. But nobody said anything. And then when I joined the Marine Corps, I had to get a statement from the police department. So I went to Cop Olaf, and he wrote. You know, he talked to me, and he wrote, and then he wrote a nice letter, signed his name, and he just said, "Have you been pulling any more airplanes around?" But Cop Olaf was the kind of guy that let you have fun, but don't hurt anything. Then you were in trouble. But I didn't know what to say. Because he still had the piece of paper. But Olaf knew who did it. But he never bothered us, never said anything.
I think we had a code of behavior in our town that you didn't go over. And I think that because of our religious training and because of the school being so prominent in our lives, it was expected of certain things of us that is not in our culture today. And that's why I think our generation gap has become so deep compared to when I'm closer to my mother's generation than I am to my children's. And that's kind of bittersweet, I would say, because
now you raised your children in a much larger community.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was quite a different change.
Yes. But we always tried to raise them with the values that we grew up with, and that isn't true of today's culture in many places, which I feel kind of sad about. Because Spring Grove did have a wonderful. It was a wonderful place to grow up, and because everybody cared for somebody else, and they were concerned for their welfare, which is a nice thing about Spring Grove.
So who was in charge of the religious training then when you were in elementary and high school?
Cornell.
Okay.
Cornell, I believe, was on the board, or they must have had a board, and that little house, you might say, is a stone building, but it was off the school property, and so they charged the parents so much money per year, and we got 3 times the released education, and but the parents had to pay a little stipend or something toward that. And the fellows that taught us in the parochial school were a lot of them from Luther College, and they were going to go in to be pastors in the seminary, and some of them interrupted their education to teach us first and then go on to the seminary. But it was during the war, so some of them were called up to the war.
Okay. So did they stay? Are we talking about the 1 month thing or the weekly?
No, this is all year. Throughout the school year, we had 3 times.
3 times a week.
Yeah, and I believe it was like 45 minutes. So it's quite a education for the people.
See, ours was different because each little township had their school, and they made very sure that these teachers that came, now like we had, I think her name was Agnes Bleckschuh, I think, and she lived with the Ramsteds, but she was very good. I remember her, she really made sure that we understood the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And they made sure that we understood that Jesus lived and he died and he rose again. If you have that faith, you have eternal life. But I think that's the thing that Louise and I have talked time and again, how much we appreciate growing up in a town with the values that they had in Spring Grove. It's meant a lot to us, and we've tried to teach our children. And now we got the fun of trying to teach our great-grandchildren.
I'm sure.
But you had asked a question about country and city.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a car because my dad had died, but we lived on that farm. But in the winter, of course, we had all dirt roads, and they didn't have ditches so the roads were filled with snow, so we went to town by sleigh. And I remember where we used to tie the horses up, and we had to put the blanket on the horses. And then when we went to go home, we'd take the blanket off that was hot from the horses. They call them horse ropes.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd put those over to keep us warm. And of course, what we had was just a box.
Mm-hmm.
A sleigh with a big box on it. It wasn't a nice kind of sleigh that you'd like to have. And then in the summer, we try to get to town on Wednesday nights and Saturday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, during the Depression, there wasn't anybody in the stores. Everybody was on the streets. And my mother I know Mrs. Cyrus Lee, they'd talk, and there was just sort of a pattern. Then we had 4-H kids that we went to 4-H with. Because the school east of us, Kinneberg was there, Glenn, and Kenneth Buxengard.
Mm-hmm.
So we became close friends.
Mm-hmm.
So it was wonderful growing up.
Were you also involved in 4-H then as a city kid, or was
no,
that
city
separate?
kids didn't go to
Didn't
4-H,
go.
but
Okay.
we were active in Girl Scouts.
Oh, okay.
And after junior high, we still maintained our senior scouting.
Uh-huh.
And it was during the war, and everybody in Spring Grove seemed to have some kind of war effort. And we had Vina Alvin, who was a nurse, teach us how to get through our first aid badge.
Uh-huh.
And once we earned that, we went to school, and after school we'd go down to the hospital, and Yvonne LeVold and I would make beds. We were taught how to make them
The right way.
correctly. And then we had to feed some old men who were in a kind of like a ward now on first floor there of the hospital. And we fed them mush. And then I got home, I could hardly eat my supper because I thought I was and we always were afraid that those men would get up and run around in there, and we thought, oh, what are we going to do? But that was a war effort. My dad took clothes that didn't sell, and he wanted to send them to Norway, but he didn't have any address of the relatives, so he sent them to Greece. Somebody had given him that name. So, and my mother, I remember, rolled bandages.
Mm-hmm.
And everything was for the war effort.
Sure.
So it was a good time to grow up. Nobody had anything. And if they made any money, they couldn't buy anything because nothing was produced. They didn't have any refrigerators or wash machines
Sure.
to buy. So, but I remember going in grade school when the snowplow would come in and we'd have a lot of snow. They had big drifts over by the Silling house. We would go and stomp in those things with our snowsuits on. By the time we got to school, we had wool snowsuits, and you hung them up in the cloakroom, and it smelled so awful from that wet wool. I remember that. But we had more fun going to school in those snow dress. And then when we had roller skating time, we had brown stockings that went over our long underwear. And if you fell, you'd always get a hole in the knee, and there'd be your white underwear. I made stilts, so I went up to the lumber yard. They let us take scrap lumber,
Mm-hmm.
and I went home and I made stilts, and I painted them Chinese red and even put a little rubber lift on each one, and I could walk up and down the front stairs of my grandfather's house.
Wow.
And then I had a bike, and when it got old, I painted it purple with an orange polka dot. And the little Thorson boy, who was about 6 years old, came over and he said, "Oh, where do you get paint like that?" And I said, "Well, they sell that polka dot paint down at the hardware store. Why don't you go get some?" I had pop art before pop art was popular.
Well, I started to go with her. She was, when I came out of the Marine Corps, she was 16 and we started to go together. She had a purple bike with orange polka dots.
He
And
met me at
she's
home.
still that same way.
She is.
She hasn't changed.
We had fun though, because we were in high school. I had about 6 girls that were, in town, and we could all get together.
Mhm.
And the superintendent's daughter was one. We were not allowed to dance in the school gymnasium. So when we had prom night, the
Mhm.
girls would buy a pretty dress, go up to the banquet and sit and eat there, then go to a movie. That was the end of it. That was a prom, used to be.
Mhm.
And then we said to Isla Mae, she said, "Couldn't we get your dad to help us get a dance in the gymnasium?"
Mm.
So they used to always vote against it because of the religious training building being over the property there. So we got Isla Mae's dad and everybody in, and our class got dancing in the gymnasium. We thought that was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And we said, "You don't want your girls going to lacrosse to the Avalon to dance, do you? All those Camp McCoy boys are down there, and you don't want your girls."
They can't be trusted. No.
So we were happy that we girls got that done.
Boy, that's pretty
Well,
good. I didn't
we
realize
had
that.
more fun.
Oh.
We went to the show, and then we had the banquet, and then we all went to the Avalon, and
Oh,
and
and
then
did
we
dance.
danced till they closed up. And then I remember it was about 1 o'clock. Then we'd go down 2nd Street to a restaurant, and then have another big meal, and then go home.
Oh.
But of course, Yelly didn't want his daughter doing that.
No.
No.
You were wild. You were wild. We had a band. The kids in Spring Grove were really lucky because you could be in the one-act plays, you could be in chorus, you could be in band, or you could be in basketball. We had a lot going on all the time.
Mhm.
And then you had church choir, and then Girl Scouts, and we were senior scouting, and we had a lot going on all the time.
And then we had the country kids,
Right.
that in the summer we were busy. And my big thrill this year, I got to go to that Green Lake Bible camp because I used to get out of church and I'd see these kids in our class, the city kids, got on the school bus to go to camp. We couldn't.
Oh.
But so now I got to go.
Got to go.
Yeah.
We went there for Sunday service.
Oh, that's the camp I went to too. From
That's
our,
what I
our
went to,
areas.
too.
Yeah, Green Lake was such a place to go. Oh.
Yeah.
They have a Norwegian style church.
But
Yeah.
but you had asked about the country. The other thing is, we had to work. And then I was lucky. I mentioned that Maria and I stayed in this house for a couple of years. Then later they started the school bus in our area. And then I was lucky. I was 15. I got Arnold Sanders asked me, so I'd drive the school bus.
Did you
And,
need a chauffeur's license for that one?
I don't know.
Not
I went
like
up to the
today.
bank and gave him 25 cents and got my license.
You ever didn't have to take a test.
No, you didn't.
But
That's good.
that really helped because that gave income.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then I could milk in the morning early and drive the school bus and come home. And so I had a good way of making money.
Yeah. Oh, so
But we had a very good life. I mean, it maybe sounds sad, but we created our fun.
Oh, fun. So you had to just Wilmington to Spring Grove was just wherever
No,
it was in
I drove from Wilmington up our road because we lived 3.5 miles. But I picked the kids up further And then when I got to Minneapolis, or to Spring Grove, then I had a north route.
Ah.
I remember it went north down by Olaf Chomi and around by, there was a Dieters. But I took them first, and then I get back, and then I take the other kids that went down to Wilmington.
Oh, okay.
But Santa's there was a county road that went up through Wilmington, and that's where the bus started a few years before that.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, that made a big difference, though, for kids' lives.
well, it made it possible for me to go to school
Yeah.
and then be home. I didn't have to rent a room.
Yeah, and for some kids, I'm guessing they didn't go at all because they couldn't rent a room either. Maybe they would stop at 8th grade to make it possible for kids to go to more school.
I don't know that
Okay.
that, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
There were some. Well, we were to General Bessie gave a talk at this Minnesota Historical Society, and they did this work on the greatest generation,
Mhm.
and it talked about growing up in the 20s, the 30s, then the war, and only 160,000 people had a graduate degree, and at that, during World War II, only 24% had a high school degree.
Oh.
So education really didn't develop until the GI Bill came.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually signed a year before the war ended,
Oh.
because they knew they'd have 16 million service people come back and there wouldn't be jobs.
Sure.
And 49% of service people like myself went to school in the GI Bill,
Mm-hmm.
which was a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so the number of graduates in high school, you know, increased many times, and same with college.
Mm.
Well, I worked in my dad's store. I can remember when I was a little kid, though, and the salesman came in. That was a good time to ask my dad for a nickel for
He didn't want to look
Marilyn
cheap.
Bentley Yeoman was with me, and I'd go and say, Dad, kid, you got a nickel so I can buy some pop. and then the salesman would give me a dime to get rid of it. So,
Then Marilyn
I
got
learned
a pop too.
And no, I worked in my dad's store when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
Then he had a dry cleaner basement in the basement. I had to work there when it's really hot.
Wow.
Dry cleaning is hard.
Yeah.
When you do, and I did that. My dad never wanted to pay me, though. He said, "No, you just work."
This is what
So
you
I
do.
did that. And I even did some buying for the store, and it was a good education too. And there is when you showed the merchandise to people.
Uh-huh.
Now today, everybody goes through the merchandise themselves.
Mhm.
There you had
But
to
you
kind
would
of sell.
display and.
Hmm.
Oh, okay.
And so that was rather good education for
Yeah.
me. But one time my mother's sister Lil in Chicago needed somebody to stay with her aunt who had an ulcerated sore in her leg, and I was 14 and spent all summer in an apartment in Chicago watching over Marie Fredrickson, who was a nurse.
Uh-huh.
Mother always said, "Oh, Louise will do it," so they sent me off to do that. And then I had to go down and get groceries and everything like that, and that was quite an education.
I bet
That was
completely
good training,
That
because
was
she's
good
been
training.
taking care of me.
Yeah. I know what indigent meant. But, you know, when you think about it, children are expected to do things then, rather than to just have a good time. But we had a good time because we got to Bible camp, and we got
Sure.
to do band stuff. You know, you could go to different towns. And
I bet it helped you appreciate a smaller
Yeah,
town life
yeah.
after being in a big city like
But
that.
living in my grandfather's house was the best experience because we had an attic with all old clothes with bustles and hats with things, and we could put on plays. And my grandfather had this den with swords and heads and
Oh my.
in the fireplace room. And then we had in the foyer there was a music room, and with a grandfather clock up in the stairway, we'd open these sliding doors and we'd ring the clock till midnight, and we had somebody lying on the piano bench with a sword behind him. They say, "Who killed so-and-so?" We had dramatic plays. And so we really had a good time in the Flanagan house because, and they liked to entertain, and it was a nice...
Tell them about the, you know, the little tiny Austin car.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember the little Austin cars? Well, they came down the street, and I said, I was a youngster, and I said to Betty and her friend, Sarah Marie Kahn, they was a dentist, I said, look at that car. How did that get so small? And Sarah Marie said, well, when they manufacture them, they make them and they paint them and they set them out to dry, and if it rains, they shrink. And I believed her. But we used to have the milkman come by with ice, you know, for the ice box. And that was really fun to see that. That was still Leon's the dairy, I believe, that came around.
So, yeah.
And then, of course, the milk came. We had delivered milk. And a Watkins man used to come by, and Mother never liked to have the salesman come to the door. And she just had an end curl, and her hair was all frizzy, and she had an old house dress on. And she was out where the ice box was, and a guy knocks on the door and says, "Is the lady of the house home?" And Mother says, "Oh no, I just been Tilly." So we had a good time. My dad had the best sense of humor, so they'd always go into the store and ask Dad for a good joke, because he'd hear him from the sales.
Sure.
And then my dad said everybody would come in and want to read Perdonola, the comic strip in the paper. And he said they'd come all the way in from the front door, all the way to the back, and read it in the paper. And then they'd walk out and they wouldn't buy a thing. But that was depression. I guess that was depression. So that was, they made their day with it. I thought that was kind of fun.
I think Louise and I have talked to a lot of people about our hometown. And they would ask us, what's so special about it? And it was so easy to say, well, first of all, they had very good ethics. First of all, you had a good religious training, and you know, that's really what life's about. And the second thing is, in this little town, you knew the goof-offs, and you knew the ones that weren't. And it set a pattern for you. Because who wants to be a goof-off?
Sure.
And it really helped you set your ideals. But I think her dad told the story, what happened to him. He bought the store in 1929 for $29,000. And he had $10,000 that he had put down, that he'd saved up. And then the Depression came. And one day the salesman tried to sell him something, and he says, I can't. I just can't. Well, he said, why? Well, he said, look at these overalls. I paid $3 for them. Now the price is $1.50. He says, I can't. And he said the salesman kept pushing him, and finally the salesman said, Sid, anybody ever starved to death in Spring Grove? He said, no. He said, well, did anybody get sick and not... You got a hospital? Yeah. Well, he said, did anybody die and not get a good funeral? Mike said no, and he says, well, Mike, what in the heck are you worried about? And he said, you know, that changed my whole idea. Then I realized that if I sold what I had, I couldn't sell anymore. So he said, I started to buy, and that saved my... And he said, I borrowed money in 1929, and I never paid it off till in the 40s.
Oh, think of that.
And Olben, the druggist, built a brand new house, and he never could make a payment on it. He just paid the interest.
FHA loan. It was. But they just told him to just pay the interest.
I think he built his before that loan, Louise. But he said, you know, all I had, and he says, boy, the bank was so happy to get the interest. But we were fortunate to grow up in the Depression when it was very difficult. And of course, World War II, the Depression was still on when that came.
Yeah.
So, living in a little town, you see what everybody else has.
Sure.
And it's a real education. And we've always felt bad that our children didn't get that opportunity. Because, you know, you live in a big city in a certain area, they form that, but they don't get a chance to see the other areas like you do in a little town.
It's true.
And after 58 years,
Now
Pretty
you
good.
got your opportunity to move back to Spring Grove.
We'll find you a place.
The Alvin place just sold.
We can come back
I
home.
just drove by the assisted living.
There you go. I'll move in with you.